Welcome to the Off the Charts Football Podcast. I'm Matt Manicherian, joined as always by our producer, Justin Stein. And today we have Jordan Vanek from the 33rd team here with us. He's the head of DFS over at the 33rd team. So when he's not interviewing Antonio Freeman about the Packers receiving stuff right now or writing massive Twitter threads that get all kinds of attention, he's right here with us. And I always love having the DFS heads on the show because Jordan's always looking at football from a very different lens than I tend to. And yet we seem to arrive at a bunch of similar conclusions and end up seeing things surprisingly similarly. So, Jordan, so excited to have you on. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, no, it's definitely good to be here. Yeah, some things on Twitter can get out of hand. We'll definitely get into one of the tweets recently that I got out of hand because you can post some great data threads and some cool stuff, but you say something that gets taken out of context and then people run with it. Fan bases are strong, and I've learned that we all are, questioning Patrick Mahomes' greatness. I got told from plenty of Chiefs Kingdom that Patrick Mahomes has dealt with so much criticism in his career.
That's exactly what your purpose was there, to denigrate Mahomes. I'm going to ask you about that for sure. I definitely have criticized Josh Allen in the past and gotten it from Bills Mafia. So I'm pretty familiar with it. I've been wrong on that front before, even if he is throwing interceptions left and right these days. But that's sort of what we want to get into today. Before we talk about that, we should talk about the 33rd team and the edge. For anybody that doesn't know, over at the 33rdteam.com, in addition to all the great content they have from all sorts of former players, coaches, GMs, analysts like Jordan. In addition to that, we've built the Edge fantasy tool, which is really the most powerful, nerds would call it a querying tool, but a stat portal, but not just a stat portal, an ability to split things by what really matters on the football field and understand which quarterbacks are likely to face which coverages this week and how they perform against those coverages. Examples like that. So we're excited because within the next couple of days, we're going to be unleashing a new element of the Edge. Jordan, you want to tell the people a little about that?
Yeah, the Trenches tool will be coming here for us. And as someone who is more so on the side of coverage schemes and understanding how those kind of implement and work on their side, this will be nice for me to get an idea of the pass blocking and the run blocking efficiency of every team across the league, and specifically to the matchup coming up. There's not many places in the industry where you can get good data on pass blocking and run blocking schemes, and everything you guys have at Sports Info Solutions does that. I'm not an O-line guy. I'm not a D-line guy, but looking at this tool and what we have and the purpose of the end goal for it all, it'll be massive for me to understand, okay, this is a game where it has a high Vegas total, but this is a spot where this run blocking team, they could just control the clock for a Derrick Henry game, or going ahead against the Eagles where they're not really good against the run. I've seen it. I've been watching it. But now you get into spots where it's like, oh, maybe let's go to Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson because Commanders have the edge on the offensive line and run blocking, and this is where the game's going to go, and you'll be able to predict better matchups because the game of football is won in the trenches, and this will be a great tool to have.
Yeah, as a former wide receiver DB, I'm on the forefront of believing that the game is won in the trenches. Give me a quarterback and they give me O-line, D-line every day of the week. And as somebody who analyzes this stuff and gets into the numbers, I think part of the reason why, besides the fact on TV, you can see the receivers and the running backs a lot easier than you can see the offensive, defensive line matchups. But, fantasy is built around this stuff. All the sort of stats that we've had forever, it's where the ball is. It's where you're looking. So it's natural that that's the way that it's developed. But I think that a lot of people that analyze football can sleep on just the amount of impact that can have. They throw their hands in the air and they're like, oh, wow, football is unpredictable. When actually it's like, no, this team is much better up front. They're much better at blocking and tackling than this other team is. That can go a long way. So yeah, the Trenches tool incorporates not just run blocking matchups, right? How good you are run blocking against the other team, but also pass blocking, how well you pass block versus how well the opposing team's front seven is getting after the quarterback. Because as you know, that has a ton of impact on what sort of efficiency we can expect from the quarterbacks as they play the game. And then last but not least, the game script stuff, where we're letting you know yeah, we think this offensive line's a lot better than that defensive line in run blocking, but we don't expect them to run the ball. They're only going to have 19 rush attempts this game, which is also, obviously, if you're thinking of things from a fantasy perspective or just trying to understand anything betting wise or just trying to understand the sport better like me, all that stuff's super valuable. So, yeah, we're excited for that. Look out for the newest addition to the Edge, the Trenches matchup tool.
It'll be an absolute blast when that gets released. I can't wait to actually get my hands on it from a user side of things.
All right. So from the trenches back over to the back end, one of the things that you wrote about this week, and to be honest, the thing that you wrote about that I found to be more interesting when compared to the thousand whatever responses and all that kind of stuff. The NFL, and you pointed this out right away when I said you want to come on the podcast, you said, yeah, we have to talk about the NFL going away from cover 3, switching more to cover 2, cover 4 schemes, and how those are causing problems for quarterbacks. I couldn't agree more. I think that if you really start to analyze why is scoring down and why are all the unders hitting and all that kind of stuff, I think it inevitably leads you back to this as really a big part of what's going on in the core there. So what's some of the premise of what you wrote about? I want to debate this with you a little bit.
This is one thing that I was looking into, and recently we've seen a lot of teams go to more cover 4 than what they normally do, and that was because Patrick Mahomes. What he was doing was causing teams frustration because he could just throw it over their cover 3, especially on the sidelines to Tyreek Hill, in the seam to Travis Kelce, and the counter that teams went to for him specifically before Tyreek Hill left was going cover 2, cover 4, keeping 2 safeties back, forcing them to run because they don't have the running backs to be able to do it effectively, and teams can tackle them before they get too many yards. And when they throw against their cover 2, cover 4, Mahomes wants to push the ball down the field, and it caused him to start checking it down, which we saw towards the end of last year. He had a really low ADOT. He led the league in yards after the catch from passing production. And what I'm seeing this year is more teams are adapting that style of play, and cover 3 took over when the Legion of Boom came out. Right. Everybody wanted to emulate that. Everybody wanted to get to that scheme because it was causing fits for everybody. So every quarterback got used to throwing in the passing lanes that are provided from cover 3. Now that we've gone to cover 2, the middle of the field is an uncomfortable area for teams to throw against. And you're watching Russell Wilson, who just doesn't like to throw in that area, having real problems as a quarterback, obviously more so with the offense and coordinator and play calling. But overall, in the schemes that we're seeing from teams are causing fits for a lot of quarterbacks who are used to throwing cover 3. And Gus Bradley, who's one of the guys who implemented this cover 3 in Seattle, he's gone away from it. If the person who built it has it as an identity is now away from it and going towards a cover 2 style of play, cover 4, it tells you a lot about where things are going from an NFL standpoint.
I think you're spot on. So just to make sure everybody's staying with us, when you think about coverages, I think a lot of people naturally think, is it man, is it zone? You can't play man against this guy. You can't play zone against this guy. But I would argue that first in the progression for the quarterback, forget about what I argue. First thing in the progression of the quarterback is identifying the safety structure. Then from there, you can start to narrow things down and start to figure out if this is man underneath, if this is zone underneath. But the safety structure is the first thing that you're going to have to figure out. Obviously, cover 0, no safeties. But then the single high scheme is an indicator that it's some version of cover 1 or cover 3. And usually that's going to be a heavier box, right? You only have one safety up high. So you have a heavier box. It's kind of asking the offense to throw a little bit more. Whereas if you bring the 2 safeties up high now, you're playing usually either a cover 2 or a cover 4 base scheme, which is going to end up with more protection on the deeper part of the field by the nature of the structure. It's also, oftentimes going to lead to more check down opportunities, especially cover 4, I would say, just because you really only have 3 underneath defenders in a true cover 4, a true quarters coverage, where cover 2 is almost designed to go against some of those West Coast concepts a little bit more and kind of fight that. But we're seeing a mix, both of those concepts being used a whole bunch more. And teams, I think, basically just saying, I think it's kind of like catching up to the analytics. Passing's way more effective than rushing in terms of creating yardage, in terms of creating expected points added. So we need to do something that's going to make them check to run. And so I think that's part of what's going on. But to your point, that's made things really difficult for quarterbacks because it's either like, okay, I'll do check downs, I'll hand the ball off, I'll be boring, or I get impatient and I'm throwing into a coverage where I really shouldn't be throwing into it.
Yeah, the biggest thing that I've also noticed is like the eye discipline of the quarterback. When you're facing cover two, the middle of the field is where you want to attack between the safeties. But if you just stare down that guy, the safeties are breaking on the football, and we're seeing a lot of like Juju Smith-Schuster last week. MBS got set up in a spot where they're getting the receivers hurt. We've seen Tom Brady plenty of times kind of put his guys in a spot where it's where he's supposed to attack, but the safety makes a read and it's bang, bang play. And I know player safety is super important, but this is where it's kind of leading towards for referees to make decisions on these types of hits. And just in general, these quarterbacks aren't used to seeing this. And when they're checking it down to the running back, players are tackling well. And I believe it was ESPN, Dan Orlovsky pointed out that we're having the highest yards per carry we've had in a very, very long time. And again, it's just the credit of the way linebackers are built now. We're not seeing the stocky tackling machine at linebacker. We need a guy that can cover a tight end, cover a slot receiver, be able to maneuver in zone coverage and try to handle Cooper Kupp, even though obviously that never works. And it's changed the game of football in a way that I'm very intrigued to see what is the next iteration of it, because there's so many. You go four verts against the cover two, you can kind of try to find that spot where safety breaks too early and then the outside's 1-on-1. But in general, just these quarterbacks that aren't used to it, they're going to have to adapt, and we're going to have to see guys make plays after the catch. That's where the game, I believe, is going. And I don't think there's necessarily a coverage that can kind of stop that as long as your guys are breaking tackles. So for example, the move for Kadarius Toney, I think, was a winning move for the Chiefs to actually go to the Super Bowl. This is a player that when his rookie year and coming out, that's who he was. And you're starting to see it. I think he caught like a 3-yard pass that he took for 20 last week. And it's like, he just got there. It's just getting moving for them. And just in general, these types of players are going to become more and more important for the game of football.
You know, you talk about how the cover four, the quarters is coming up. And I think you quoted some really good numbers about the percentage of time that teams are playing quarters. And you could kind of group in what we call combination looks into theirs too, because a lot of times those are quarters concepts when teams are running those. But there's a really interesting sort of trend that is increasing, but we saw it sort of increase first on the college football level. And it's this like recurring theme that we always see of things in football coming from the bottom up, coming from high school, even at times coming up to the NFL level. Not a lot of experimentation, but then things like this seem to take hold on the NFL side. It all seems to me like this is the natural progression, right? Like you just said, teams are begging them to run the ball more, to check it down more often. So if we've been saying for years, you get 7 yards per play when you throw it and 4 yards per play when you run it, if that becomes 6 when you throw it and 5 when you run it, and then you consider the impact of turnovers and things like that too, all of a sudden, we might be approaching the sort of equilibrium point that we've talked about for years, which is finally, if it's instead of 7 yards per pass and 4 yards per run, if it's 6 yards per pass and 5 yards per run, and you have to incorporate, the risk of turning the ball over and how coaches would rather run the ball, offensive line would rather run the ball in the first place rather than pass the ball. All of a sudden, we might be starting to more approach that equal. I still don't think we're quite there, but this year has been the first sign of like a sort of market correction, if you will.
Yeah, this is like Nick Saban and Bill Belichick kind of created their style of defense, and then a lot of teams adapted that. And now you're looking at teams that are like, okay, well, we know how to beat it. Now you're going to a spot where it's going to change the other way, where I think an offense to kind of pay attention to is Tennessee. I know teams won't quite go to the route that they're at, but with the way they spread you out, because college football is a little bit longer, you can kind of get a little bit extra distance on the hashes, but it becomes a numbers game, and it's a nightmare for teams to defend. If you don't have safeties who can really cover, then you're kind of set for a bad spot. I mean, pass rushers and offensive line play for Tennessee in the college level make it a little bit easier to run it. But in general, spreading teams out, getting numbers in the box, if you got an electric running back or you got receivers with that kind of speed, it's a nightmare. And we're seeing sort of the speed kind of take over in Miami, which is the perfect example. You're not going to find Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle walking around just casually in the NFL, but with the more speed that comes in from a Tennessee, from some of the other schools that we're seeing, I think that style of play is going to someone's going to end up running something similar or have a few formations where they're very spread out and on the boundary. And I'm interested to see how teams adapt to it.
Well, so if you look at just football, say high school football, how it's adapted around the country in the last 30 years or so, you went from an environment where it was wing tee everything. We're going to try to gap scheme run you and create our matchups that way. Kind of, be the most disciplined team. Then it became, what an easier way to do that same stuff is to run those same concepts, but do it out of a spread formation. Because you just play those box games. We'll throw a bubble screen if you won't send the numbers out there with our two receivers that are way out wide. But generally, we want to have our 5 offensive linemen against your 4 defensive linemen and 2 linebackers, and have a really good runner at quarterback and a really good runner at running back. And all those receivers are actually just window dressing. So I think that's more like what the Eagles are doing right now when you look at how difficult they are to defend, because they are spreading you out. They have the yards after the contact threat. They have the I can beat you over the top or intermediate threat. They have the tight end threat. And then on top of that, you actually have to worry about 2 really competent runners that can play you without any of those guys even being involved. So I love that design. I think it makes sense, especially when you consider you have to zig where others zag in football, right? It's the rise of the West Coast offense that gives birth to cover 2 in the first place. So there's always a count, and then there's a point, and there's a counterpunch. So yeah, I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah. No, I definitely am. I think there's a lot of iterations that we're kind of starting to see from it's always from high school to college to the NFL. It just kind of takes a little bit longer. I think with the more availability of the analytics / just the connection that we all have from being able to see film from high school teams in HD, it feels like nowadays it's amazing to actually get the ideas and concepts from those levels and then start to implement them at the pro level. It's just about having the right pieces in place and being able to, again, win in the trenches, because no matter what, if you want to run all these concepts and all these schemes, if you can't block, you can't do anything. Yeah,
that's always going to be a big part of it. All right, let's think about how this plays out, because I'm curious. We mentioned Mahomes before, and I'm curious in kind of applying this out, because you indicated that you think that there might be something to a sort of blueprint to stop Mahomes this year. So I'm curious, what are your thoughts there?
So Vrabel showed it to us. Vrabel is unbelievable as a defensive coach, defensive scheme. It feels like with the Chiefs, with their receiving core, everybody had this idea of Mahomes kind of taking a step back as an efficient passer because no Tyreek Hill. And with the receivers, Kadarius Toney move is going to change some things. But in reality, who's a guy who can truly beat someone in man-to-man coverage? And outside of Kelsey, they don't really have that. So Vrabel, what he did was, his front has Jeffrey Simmons and Bud Dupree, so it makes it a little bit easier because they're just absolute monsters. But you try your best to contain him in the pocket, which is a nightmare in itself. Play 7 in coverage. You leave 1 safety back because they truly don't have a guy that can beat you man-to-man. Make sure you got 2 on Kelsey, then just let it go. Let your guys come up and press them at the line of scrimmage. Be physical with this receiving core. And I know cover 2, cover 4 was the way to slow Mahomes down, but that was Mahomes slowing him down against when he had Tyreek Hill. Because Tyreek Hill in cover 1 scheme, good luck. It's a track meet. He's gonna beat you in a multitude of ways. It becomes a game of Kansas City can't run the ball. Their running backs aren't really that great, and then the receivers. Yeah, no, the receivers can do it when Mahomes extends plays and just is Patrick Mahomes and can fit it into coverages that you just don't normally see. But in reality, when you give him this look and you press him, he can't do anything if his players aren't open. This isn't something you should do against Josh Allen because he has Diggs, he has Gabe Davis. This is something against Patrick Mahomes with MVS and Juju that will work. And I think that teams, you can't blitz them. You don't need to bring 5 because at the end of the day, his escapability is a nightmare to defend. I think it's rushing 4, playing 7 in coverage, disguising your rush of 4. You can obviously drop a D lineman if you want, but reality is I'm playing man and I'm pressing this team until they show me they can beat someone in man-to-man coverage. And my defensive end is chipping Kelsey every single time.
Right. And I mean, if you're playing cover 1 over the top, you could potentially double team Kelsey. You could play kind of with a rat or robber over the middle of the field to make things more difficult in there. I think that's a big part of why they made the move for Tony. I think basically Andy Reid's looking at his offense and he's saying, this is something that now is a way that we can be defended. And until we get somebody that can press and force you to play with 2 safeties back, we're not going to have any of the structures that we want. So I'm with you there. It's interesting how they've navigated it though, because man, it's still been the best offense in the league. And Patrick Mahomes is just absolutely unbelievable.
With the Chiefs, I think the 2 teams that can actually dethrone them are the Miami Dolphins and the Buffalo Bills, because defensively, they have the defensive line to rush 4 or even 3 and get after Patrick Mahomes. And from a secondary perspective, I think they can match up man coverage. The 2 injuries that are most important to get back are going to be Trey White and Byron Jones. And with that, these offenses also have enough firepower to, 1, keep Mahomes off the field, but 2, score points while doing so. I think Miami is a little bit more dangerous from a running scheme perspective than Buffalo. And that's going to be a real difference maker when you're trying to keep Mahomes off the field. And from the Bills side of things, the Josh Allen elbow injury is scary to me. Obviously, he's the Incredible Hulk, it feels like, and it didn't look like it really bothered him too much in that game against the Minnesota Vikings. But just from those 2 teams' perspective, I think those are the 2 guys that can actually take down Mahomes in a postseason game, even if it's in Kansas City.
Yeah, hard to argue with the Bills, of course. Dolphins have continued to just prove everybody wrong. Would you throw the Ravens or the Bengals into that category?
I don't think, Jamar Chase's hip injury is one of one that kind of needs to get back. And with the loss of Chidobe Awuzie, actually, with the Bengals, I don't think their defense has the DBs to actually defend Mahomes for an entire game. Their offense obviously has the firepower, but that offensive line scares me. And the way that they call plays scare me as well.
Yeah.
And with the Ravens, Rashad Bateman, the loss of him is tremendous to Lamar. He was the number 1 receiver to keep up with the firepower. Mark Andrews will eventually be fine. He usually plays through these kinds of injuries, but I don't think the Ravens have enough firepower and offense to beat Mahomes in a postseason game.
Yeah, no, I think you make good points. You look at the Bills front line, and it's not just the 4 starters, but the whole rotation that they bring in there. They really seem to just have one after another. The challenge, like we've seen, I guess, the past week was, what about when you have either an injury to Tremaine Edmonds or to Matt Milano? It seems like unless both of those guys are on the field, they're missing something that really ties their whole defense together. So I get concerned about when one of those guys is injured for them, but I agree with you. I think they're as likely as anybody to be right there with the Chiefs. The Dolphins, I thought, was interesting because they bring in Bradley Chubb, but then they lose Emmanuel Ogbah for the rest of the season. That said, they had a pretty interesting little 3rd down lineup this past week that they were showing, where it was Bradley Chubb and Melvin Ingram on the outside with Jalen Phillips and Christian Watkins on the inside.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that could be really formidable. The Phillips' ability to slide inside on those pass rushing downs, even without Agba in the mix, I think is really interesting.
And I mean, we mentioned it before, going from college to the NFL, that's what the Miami Hurricanes did with Jalen Phillips and Gregory Rousseau. Both of those guys, they put out a 4 defensive end package where it would be him, Rousseau, and then I think it was Quincy Roche. And I can't remember. I think the last one was an actual D tackle. And Rousseau and Phillips would line up on the same side. And I think Gregory Russo was the one who actually moved inside for a lot of those. But Gregory Russo
Makes
had
sense.
like
He's a
8
giant.
sacks. He had like 8 sacks on a guard. And it was just like, why is this guy getting all these sacks and he's not playing a ton? And all of a sudden you realize that Jalen Phillips is a first-round pick. He's also a first-round pick. And just that caused fits for the Browns offensive line. And if it's causing fits for the Browns offensive line, I don't think there's an offensive line in football that's going to be able to consistently defend that type of front on third downs, because all those guys can get after the quarterback, and health will play a major factor. Ogba's a big loss to Miami. I also think there was one player in free agency still that I think is a player that should be getting looks and should be something that kind of draws up with Ndamukong Suh. I don't know if he really wants to go to football again, but familiar with Miami, loves the area because obviously he went to Tampa Bay. And just in general, if you're in Miami Dolphins and you can potentially sign him, get him on a contract for this playoff run, add him to that front, that's just a nightmare approach for defenses. Even if he's not the player he was the previous years, I know his age and everything, but I think he was kind of holding out for any team to like get for a Super Bowl run. That's who I would be calling if I were Chris Geary in Miami.
I mean, I get it. He sees Gronk do the thing. He's like, let me do Gronk for defense. Yeah. Makes sense. All right, let's get into the controversy. So you came out on Twitter this week and you said that Tua is the best quarterback in the NFL, and then second best is Herbert, and Mahomes is somewhere near the bottom, right?
Yeah, no, that's exactly that's exactly what I wanted that one to say.
Yeah, Twitter aside, what was the point you were actually making? And let's see if we debunk it or if we kind of like it.
So the point that I was getting at is what Tua is doing is elite. It's not just because Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle are in the lineup. It is what he does as a quarterback and how he fits perfect with what their strengths are. I know every quarterback can, throw it to Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. Patrick Mahomes just had Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is never on pace for 2,000 yards. I'm not saying that Tua makes Tyreek Hill better. What I'm getting at is we saw Tyreek Hill work with this guy. We saw Tyreek Hill put up some big numbers in Kansas City. We never saw him put up the numbers that he's putting up in Miami. I get it. Mike McDaniel's a genius. Is he that much more of a genius than Andy Reid? Is that where we're going to discredit Tua, that he's playing with a great offensive coordinator? I just think that with the way the NFL is currently, the era of not having a great weapon and winning is over. I don't think any quarterback in today's league can win without at least one guy being a great player. We're seeing Aaron Rodgers struggle mightily until finally Christian Watson was able to catch a deep ball. We've watched Tom Brady's last year in New England versus what he's doing in Tampa Bay. Josh Allen with Diggs, without Diggs. Like every single quarterback that is currently active needs a player on the outside that can win in a lot of different situations. And people have compared to Jimmy Garoppolo. Jimmy Garoppolo was never on pace for a 45 touchdown, 5,300, 5 interception season. It's unfair comparison to make between the two. I know Jimmy Garoppolo is extremely efficient, but numbers wise, what Tua is doing in the game of football, it isn't from an arm strength perspective. It's from the cerebral approach and just his ability to recognize, react, and anticipate a lot of things that the normal eye can't necessarily see. And from my point of view, I do believe that Tua is a better quarterback than Justin Herbert. I think it's very, very close. I think they're very on the same level of player. I think Mahomes is head and shoulders ahead of both of them. I think Mahomes and Josh Allen are the two best quarterbacks in the game of football, and they're in their own tier. But I think that the Tua, Justin Herberts are just a step behind.
Yeah, I mean, so I always am talking about things in terms of, is a quarterback the reason why you can win the Super Bowl? Is a quarterback a win with quarterback? Is it a win in spite of, or is it a guy that you just can't play with? Mahomes is the standard setter in the NFL right now. As silly as all-time conversations involving Mahomes are, they're not like something that is likely to be unreasonable a few years from now, right? Like we've got to see it play out before we can, put him in the Hall of Fame. But he's getting close to having enough for a Hall of Fame career already. And then, 5 years from now, you could see really Mahomes in the Elway, Marino, Montana, all that sort of range. So that's what we're talking about with Patrick Mahomes. Now, coming back a step, and I don't think that Tua right now is win because of. I think he's shown win because of so far this year. But I think really what he is, in my opinion, is more of a win with guy, a guy that you can definitely win the Super Bowl with. He can be a part of getting you there. The biggest risk being his health, based on what we've seen so far. That is the part that makes you nervous to build around him. But from a traits perspective, right, we talk about critical factors for the quarterback. He's got all kinds of accuracy, at least a 7 on the accuracy scale in terms of very good accuracy. At least a 6, maybe a 7 on the decision making type scale, because he's lightning quick decision making. Now, he has made some questionable decisions over the course of his career, and especially even earlier in this season. I haven't seen it much lately, so he's trending in a positive direction there. And then in terms of his clutch performance, all he's done is been the reason that the offense has transformed. You mentioned the pieces around him. So, like you said, are you going to take McDaniel over Andy Reid? I think objectively that's a really hard case to make. I think McDaniel's been as good as anybody in the league this year, but objectively it's a really hard case to make that Tua's getting better coaching than Mahomes got. So I'd say call that a wash. I think that Tyreek Hill is Tyreek Hill for either guy, right? So call that a wash. I think that Mahomes has had the better tight end in terms of Kelsey, and Tua's had the better second target in terms of Waddle. Call that a wash, I think. So, like, really, when you start pulling all these different pieces out, the argument that what Tua's done so far this year is just all window dressing and has nothing to do with him, that's a ridiculous argument, I think. Like, I know Bryce Rossler wants to make that argument at me, but that's a ridiculous argument.
I mean, at the end of the day, he does not have a big arm. He doesn't have it. I'm never going to say Tua can make the same throws that Justin Herbert, Mahomes, Josh Allen can make. Over 90% of throws in the NFL are under 20 air yards. Tua can make all of those throws without any question of it. Is it going to be on a corner route or a corner route to the sidelines where he's able to just fit it in there from like a side or one hash all the way to the other?
I mean, he made an opposite hash throw last week that it looked like it was in the air for about 5 seconds. But what he did was just throw the ball about 2 steps before the receiver even made break. I think it was Tyreek Hill on a 15-yard out. Like, how are you going to defend that?
Yeah, no, it becomes a game of like, yes, no, Tyreek Hill's probably the most unguardable receiver in the game of football in terms of just what he does on a football field. Doesn't make any sense. I got the chance to go down there for training camp in Miami, and I saw some routes that they haven't necessarily done yet. There was a route combination that they were working on where Tyreek Hill lined up on the outside, Jalen Waddle was in the slot. They crossed at the line of scrimmage and then crossed back. And when they did, it was when they got man coverage because, Miami plays a ton of man, and they were working on things in practice. And Boyer, and one thing I will say from Tua's development, when I went to multiple training camp stuff, Boyer and McDaniel stood next to each other the entire time. It felt as if Boyer was telling McDaniel, hey, this is the coverage I'm giving. McDaniel was like, okay, I'm going to use this play call. I want to see how Tua reacts to it. Right. The whole entire training camp felt like a trial and error of, hey, Tua, you're going to learn to make the right decisions. And in the beginning of the year, we started to see him kind of get to the steps that we needed. Obviously, the concussion thing is a whole other debate, the story. It's tough to see on any athlete. We just got to see him play against some of the bottom feeders in the NFL in pass defense. And the numbers he put up are the numbers you'd expect Mahomes, Allen, Herbert to put up against these type of teams. And just in general, it feels like every single throw is correct. It's not like, there are some plays that are a little bit underthrown to Tyreek Hill. Yes.
It looks like Mahomes, 7-on-7 right now. It really does.
Yeah. Like there was a play he made against the Bears where they showed a too high look and Trent Sherfield ran in route from the slot.
Oh, it's not fair. He's got great receivers like Trent Sherfield.
Yeah, the Trent Sherfield touchdown is kind of what I point to when anybody tells me that it's only Tyreek Hill and Waddle. And then the Mike Gesicki one against the Ravens. That throw to the freaking crossbar was it's just Yes, he's not. Yes, he's playing with great players. Everybody likes to bring up Alabama and how he had all these NFL receivers. You need, and like, I'm not going to ever look at Mahomes and be like, man, he's playing with Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. I don't think he's that good. Like, no.
Yeah, no. When Tom Brady went to the Bucks, it doesn't count because his receivers were too good. No, he got a Super Bowl. Like,
yeah, yeah, no. Mahomes, he can't beat Tom Brady when he has all his weapons, even though he's missing his left tackle, right tackle. Like, I'm never gonna bash a player because he's playing with great dudes. Like, is Tua in a very fortunate circumstance? Yes, but his first 2 years in the league, I hate when people point to it because last
they
year
were the most unfortunate circumstances.
They had the worst. They still have a bad offensive line. McDaniels just schemed up protection very well, and Tua gets rid of the ball in like 2 seconds, which is insane. But last year, they had Morse code at the offensive coordinator position where they had two different guys calling plays, and supposedly the quarterback's coach would call the play. One offensive coordinator would have to give the green light to the other offensive coordinator. Then it gets to Tua. And this first year, it was Chan Gailey, who hadn't coached since 2014. He was before the RPO was even implemented. Like, it's just...
Chan Gailey was good with the Cowboys in the 90s, but come on, like, what are we doing here?
And, I mean, Brian Flores openly wanted Deshaun Watson. Just how do you get... Like, confidence is super important for a young quarterback. Like, there's so many factors that went into his bad play. And no offense to Herbert, I'm looking at Justin Herbert right now. He is not statistically good without Mike Williams and Keenan Allen. And I am not blaming him for not being good with Josh Palmer and DeAndre Carter. I'm just pointing out you gave Justin Herbert the unfortunate circumstance, and he still has a really good running back in Austin Eckler. They are not as productive in the passing game. I don't think Mahomes would ever drop that far if Kelce was, in and out of the lineup, or with Kelce and Tyreek Hill out of the lineup. But with Justin Herbert specifically, I think Tua wishes he had Austin Eckler, Josh Palmer, and DeAndre Carter at receiver in his first year when he was playing with Lynn Bowden, Isaiah Ford. They traded Isaiah Ford to the Patriots for a 7th-round pick. Then the Patriots cut Isaiah Ford, and then the Dolphins re-signed him, and he ran 80% of the routes that week. It's just... It's insane.
And worse was, I think even worse was the offensive line that whole time. Give a lot of credit to McDaniel and Frank Smith for fixing the offensive line there. Because like you said, it's not like so when you look at like how they've cobbled it together, they made 2 free agent additions, right? They got in Teron Armstead, who when healthy has settled the left tackle position, which had been unsettled for years since they got rid of Tunsil. They got Connor Williams, who I would argue has actually been the biggest difference maker. He's come in as the starting center. He was, kind of like a depth level guard with the Cowboys before. He's been one of the best centers in the league by total points. And I think he's really just settled down all of the communication that goes on up there in a way that it was completely unsettled before. So all of a sudden, Robert Hunt, the right guard, has fallen into place. He's having a great season as well. And then you would think that the other 2 guys would be Liam Eichenberg and Austin Jackson. They're 2 high draft picks that they've had in the last couple of years. Well, both of those guys have gotten hurt, and they both, I think, have gotten Wally pipped. Robert Jones has been playing left guard. He's been outstanding. I don't remember the guy's name that's playing right tackle, but he's been better than what they've had there in the past. So draft capital aside, you made 2 free agent signings. You had one guy on your roster that started playing a whole lot better. And then this Robert Jones, he's an undrafted free agent out of Middle Tennessee State. I mean, but he's been dynamite because he fits with what they're asking him to do. And that's a big part of offensive line play, is asking them to do things that they're capable of.
This whole entire, look, Mike McDaniel is phenomenal. What he's doing on the coaching level is ridiculous. He's charismatic. He's my favorite coach in the NFL currently, just because of the way that he speaks about football, where there was the press conference the week leading up to the Vikings and about concussions and all that. And like the Friday press conference, he went and he's like, all right, call me crazy here, but what if we talked about football today? And just like his idea of the game of football, he's very self-aware, and he also knows that like he needs to put himself in great positions. I think the best move, yes, Connor Williams was the best move in free agents, or Tyreek Hill was the best move in free agency. Connor Williams, I think, was most impactful on the offensive line because the way they pull him, the way they like communication, just so much things that don't go noticed. It's showing. Like he is phenomenal on that front. The move that they made in season with trading a fifth for Jeff Wilson is
game changer,
monstrous, because the way he runs with this system, and they also got rid of Chase Edmonds' contract, just casually threw that in the Bradley Chubb deal. He is the perfect player for this system with the way that they have been blocking. He's so physical.
Yeah, he's great. Great compliment to Mostert. Two guys that came from San Francisco, know the system, understand zone running football. And I mean, it really shows you how bad Chase Edmonds. I didn't appreciate how bad his vision was until these guys started running the same. Like, man, he had an issue. It's hard to believe he was so productive earlier in his career. Just seeing how bad he was this year. All right, but here I am going to disagree with you before we get out of here on one thing. I would still take Herbert over Tua. Obviously, so far this year, Tua's had the much better season. But I would say not just the receiver injuries, also the offensive line injuries. And most importantly, we did the whole like Andy Reid versus Mike McDaniel thing before. How about Mike McDaniel against Joe Lombardi? Because I think that that's an underrated part of this. I think that Justin Herbert has fallen under the spell of a Mario Cristobal effect again. And this is a guy that has all the physical talent in the world. He has physical talent that goes beyond, I think, Tua's physical talent, even if he doesn't have the lightning quick processing and maybe not as accurate. He's got a bigger arm for sure. But, and I mean, physically what Justin Herbert is. But I think that I missed on him evaluating him coming out of college because he was in a system that hid all of his talents in such a brilliant way. I think that's where he is right now. I think they're hiding his talents. It just goes to like, this is a team that has a good record that coming back in all these games because all they do is put him behind and say, help figure this out. Like come back for us. And they're doing him no favors. And to me, that comes back to not just the injuries, but the offensive, the designs, the Chen Gailey-like design of the offense.
Yeah, no, Justin Herbert isn't in a perfect spot. I don't believe that Herbert is I don't think Tua is head and shoulders above Herbert. I think we've seen both of them in unfortunate circumstances. One thing about Justin Herbert that kind of just, I don't understand from him. I don't understand why. He doesn't run. Like, everybody talks about his athletic ability, and like, I see it. I definitely see that Justin Herbert is big, strong. He has some legs to him. They just don't use him there. Like, they just don't. Right. I don't want to take into account of what players don't do because Justin Herbert does not run. I understand he had the rib injury, but in general, he does have the big arm. There are a lot of things that without Keenan Allen, he suffered against zone coverage, which is why his yards per attempt is just so low because Josh Palmer and DeAndre Carter can't make up for how special Keenan Allen is as a receiver and stuff. And for me, again, they're not in different tiers. I think they're in the same tier. I think they're both very good to elite level quarterbacks that you like to use the term, win with and win because of. I don't think both those guys are very different in that kind of category. I know Herbert has thrown for 5,000 yards. I know what he's done as a quarterback in his career. Tua's very well on pace to have a similar season. The injury ruined the idea of 5,000 yards, but I still think there's a lot of things going great for him. And this is funny because this weekend, Herbert gets Mike Williams and Keenan Allen back from everything I've seen from practice reports. It's going to be the perfect timing for him to go beat Mahomes in Kansas City and throw for over 400 yards because that's how this one is going to go. I know that Twitter, I just want to, having good weapons makes you a better player. It always has, always will, and we shouldn't diminish people for it. Feels like the world thinks Tua is only good because of these guys. And yeah, no, he needs people to throw the ball to, but he's still, the way he looks off safeties, the way that he anticipates is elite level. I think this is more so like a Drew Brees versus Rivers / Big Ben debate in terms of the talent, where I don't think any of those three are very different. I think they do it differently, but I don't think that's how it is. I think all three of them are a step behind Peyton and Tom, which is the way I think about Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. And that's the best analogy that I've been able to use for what I think about these quarterbacks. And obviously Lamar Jackson is kind of in a very special tier of his own kind of thing where his athleticism is just ridiculous. And they just need to get him more weapons on the receiving game because he can't throw.
I don't know if he's on his own anymore because we got Justin Fields and Jalen Hurts that are starting to adopt a similar style. So
yeah, I wish Lamar Jackson had AJ Brown, Devonta Smith, and Dallas Goedert. That would be a really fun group to have for for Lamar Jackson, because in the beginning of the year, I think I posted about it a long time ago. Lamar Jackson against the blitz with Rashad Bateman was averaging over 10 yards per attempt through the first, I think it was 4 weeks. And then he lost Rashad Bateman, had 2 weeks of data. One of them was Wink Martindale and the Giants, blitzing him on over 60% of dropbacks, which is just ridiculous to say in the least. Wink Martindale is a maniac, but Lamar Jackson's yards per attempt dropped to 4.8. Fields is going to get better. I think Fields is very much on his way as an athletic quarterback, and I love what the Bears are actually doing, which I was very concerned with through most of the time in the offseason, but their plan is really, really simple: is survive the year with them, continue to develop them. In the offseason, they're going to spend a boatload of money on a new offensive line and likely get probably one more addition in the receiving game.
Yeah, I think they're pretty much – this is a rebuilding year, for lack of a better term. Don't look now. He's quietly crawling up the total points leaderboard. I think I saw that he found his way into the top 10, which even incorporates earlier this season too.
Recently, the scramble he had against Miami, where he fake pump fake, left his feet and then stomped and hit a burst that I've just not really seen. He has all the athletic intangible, from a runner perspective, that you want. He's got the bigger frame, so he can kind of take a little bit. He's got the acceleration, and in terms of long speed, I think he might be faster than Lamar. I think they're very similar from a long speed perspective. Lamar,
he's a ridiculous athlete. Wherever Justin Fields goes, he's going to be the best athlete on the field.
Yeah.
All right, Jordan, we got to get out of here. Before we go, where can people find your content?
Yeah, you can find all my content with the 33rd team. That's the 33rdteam.com. If you want to follow the Twitter, at Jordan Vanek DFS, I usually post a bunch of the data that is provided from SIS's standpoint. Found some cool data on Wan'Dale Robinson this week, Amon-Ra, and don't be afraid to play Jonathan Taylor in DFS. I don't care about the spread of Philly. They can't defend the run. Jonathan Taylor with Jeff Saturday is going to be the workhorse back and get plenty of touches. So, yeah, 33rdteam.com, Jordan Vanek DFS. That's the two places that you will find me most.
And we'll all be on the lookout for the Trenches tool, the newest addition to the Edge. And that's just the 33rdteam.com/the-edge. Jordan, thank you for coming on.
Appreciate being here. This is a blast to do. I know it's nice to talk football from a coverage standpoint and from the O-line anticipation, stuff like that, because fantasy football can get the most yet. Just talking about points per reception and how this guy scored 20 points and stuff, doesn't mean as much to me as the coverage side of things.
Awesome. Well, we'll have to do it again soon. For our producer, Justin Stein, and our guest, Jordan Vanek, I'm Matt Manicherian, and thank you for listening to the latest episode of the Off the Charts Football Podcast.